I'm going to read you a little bit from the anthology because I said what I want to say about the book so well there. It's easier than just trying to say it again or memorize it or whatever I would do. So pardon me as I'm very old-fashioned, so I'm going to be looking at the actual book, voila, instead of screen sharing anything. And I also would like to say that I don't usually appear to be in such a firelight lit space, but the way the hours are progressing and the time is getting longer, the daylight is getting longer. I keep having to move my Zoom situation around the house. It's a house full of windows and the light comes in all the time in different ways. Anyway, that's my explanation for the pinkness that you're seeing. It's not that there's any sort of fire nearby. I'm the kind of writer who's always responded to what's in front of me, whether it's child abuse memories or a fox eating persimmons in the front yard. When I saw a new grant that asked me to address something important to my community, of course, I thought of wildfire. We were 2 months past containment of the Camp Fire. It's just the dumbest name, but that was the street it started on. The Camp Fire in Paradise, California, which is 50 crow flight miles away from my house. The smoke had cleared. It was finally raining. People who'd lost their homes were starting to appear in our town because every domicile closer to Paradise had already been rented. If you don't experience a disaster yourself, it can be hard to imagine it. Photos and video are shocking, but they don't hijack your nervous system the way reality does, and they only last a few minutes. One thing I've learned about disasters is how far-reaching the consequences are and how long the effects last. The grant wanted as much involvement as possible, especially with youth. That made me think of California poets in the schools, where I worked for 12 years as a new poet, teaching mostly in juvenile hall. Kids need to get their feelings out, and poetry can be the right conduit. I thought a lot after the campfire about how those displaced children were doing, meeting for class in people's living rooms, playing basketball in unfamiliar gyms. My county is small, rural, and white. The project seemed to me to need more reach, so I stepped beyond the bounds of Nevada County, where I was poet laureate, and asked California poets in the schools to send teachers everywhere they could. Fire is not the only trouble we're up against, so I broadened the lesson plan scope to include any kind of climate crisis our state has seen: floods, mudslides, smoke, drought, coastal erosion and sea level rise, refugee populations. Again, in the spirit of reaching, I thought people would be moved and informed to read poems about climate crisis, not just to write them. I know I am. So making an all ages anthology on the subject and then donating it to libraries around sounded useful, and organizing readings from the book to engage the public did too. So the project, the grant, was for 3 things: sending teachers into schools and getting the kids to write, compiling an anthology of those poems, including adult poems, and then doing the readings, public readings all over the state of California. The teaching has been done. The poems were gathered from San Isidro to Arcata. And if you're in Oregon and don't look at a map of California every day, San Isidro is very much southern and Arcata is our northernmost town on the coast. You hold the results of this in your hand. I thought about Carolyn Forché's book, Against Forgetting, 20th Century Poetry of Witness, a book that sustains me as I put this one together. I bow deeply to the compilers who make a bouquet of many voices to show us ourselves. It's undervalued and important work. I send a nod also to Tim Green at Rattle, and his idea that traditional vehicles for publication, with their multi-year lead times, aren't always fast enough to do justice to what's going on in the world. Sometimes poems need to be written and read in the same week. The Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowships were established to encourage and honor poets laureate. I wanted to pass on that recognition and include as many other California laureates as I could in the process. Some are hosting readings, some sent poems, some are cheering me on from the sidelines. I solicited work from Juan Felipe Herrera, who has been both our California and United States Poet Laureate, but the 13 current and 16 former county and city town laureates included in these pages pretty much just showed up. There's even a migrant off course, a relocated former poet laureate of the state of Kansas. People leave their homes for many reasons, not just climate related. I live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Nisenan that they never ceded. The house that Bank of America and I together is a mile from the Nevada city. The Nisenan until their tribal status, the US government in 1964. It can be how to engage in personal reparations for the historic events from which we've benefited. Respect, thanks, apologies, and money to the Nisenan whenever I can, and would like to acknowledge them here. Proceeds from the sale of this book be toward their tribe of 147 members and federal restoration of their tribal status. Climate crisis is an experience we're sharing. Thank you for your efforts. I encourage you, as I encourage myself, to keep imagining how to bring our skills and energy to bear in facing this new world and climate crisis and taking action. Even writing poems can help. There are 114 contributors to the anthology, and 6 of us are here to read to you tonight. We're each going to read our own poem from the book and then one other. And some of them I know and some of them I don't know yet. I love this part of the process to see who chooses which one, since I know the poems pretty well from all the work that I've done, figuring out who should be in the book and looking through things. And at the same time, the book was published almost 2 years ago now, and I haven't read from it since October. So I expect to be re-surprised by hearing some of the voices again. I want to introduce my other 5 readers. 2 of them are going to be with us only for the reading, but the rest of us will be here after to answer your questions if you have some questions. Kim Shuck was the 7th Poet Laureate of San Francisco and an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellow also. Her new collection, Exile Heart, is out from That Painted Horse Press. She's a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Eileen Casaneto is a former Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, California, an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellow from the 2nd year, 2020, and author of The Pink House of Purple Yam Preserves and Other Poems. Rafael Jesus Gonzalez is the Poet Laureate of Berkeley, California, and founded the Mexican and Latin American Studies Department at Laney College. Poet and painter Ruth Bavetta is the author of No Longer at This Address. Indigo Moore is a former Poet Laureate of Sacramento, California. His latest collection is Everybody's Jonesing for Something. And we're going to start with Kim.
Hi.
Hi.
Delighted to be here. Always fire season. Flame reads the stories of tree rings out loud and for the last time. Thursday, our kitchen fire alarms went off breathing lives as we were, breathing collected things of lives, the fur and claws, the feathers, the ID cards and photographs and pocket lint. Here in the bay, our sunrises and sunsets have changed. Extreme wildfires, part of the new normal weather, and always fire season. We know the forests by when they burned, whose ashes on our windshield, whose ashes in our skin, in our lungs. The cars, immobile, fused into the melted roadway, less rain, cracked lips of hillside, flaking skin of floodplain, and the dice roll of pet sparks, conditionally captured in wire, running the dry west. Curled and silvered fingers of pine as monument. That was my poem in the book. And now I'm going to read Wildfire Spread by Denise Lowe, who was the person that Molly was talking about, the former poet laureate of Kansas, who is also Lenape. Wildfire Spread. Branching power lines, sparkles, detour transfer stations, electrify backfeed to light, Santa Rosa. Shut off the geysers in the hills along Dry Creek Valley. Here dendritic chortle of generators, arid gullies, spider slopes, junipers, splayed leaves repeat, ready to burst flammable pitch. Red helicopters loop overhead, pouring water on grass tinder, smoke billows, dust devil blades. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. Next, we're going to hear from Eileen.
Thank you, Molly. Good evening. I'm very honored to be here. The first poem I'll be sharing is one I wrote to honor fire as the ecological shapeshifter that it is, and honor the lives it has taken, as well as what rises from the ashes. Fireborn. I once went wild over repurposed things, tweeds, beads, driftwood, silvery wormwood, got worked into frames, footgear, chandeliers. My favorite, though, is a floor lamp from a limb trimmed from an old manzanita, the collar of burnished red pear. Wild child of the last wildfire, evergreen and unsparing. Our gratitude for the little apples and the many equally wild and resolute things that fed on them. That charm of hummingbirds, that grist of bees, that flutter of butterflies. You were the kindling and the offering, the time-worn prayer above the movement of air. This second poem is by Muad Belkhalfia, who is a fourth grader when he wrote this. But now to fire. Once I was the mist in the clouds. I was the one drop of rain. But now I am the storm. But now to fire. But now to smoke. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eileen. Those kid poems get into my skin, under my skin, everywhere. Raphael.
I think Molly mentioned that I was born and raised on the border, El Paso Juarez area, and consequently, I write in both languages, and so I will share such with you. Luna llena en verano de sequía. La luna llena se eleva con un tinte rojizo del humo de los bosques encendidos. En la sequía, las aguas que levantaría se escasean, como el salmón en los ríos. Su color al aparecer es ese del pertubo en la sangre. Full moon in a dry summer. The full moon rises with a reddish tint from the smoke of the forest burning. In the drought, the water she would lift grows scarce as the salmon in the streams. Her color, it would seem, is that of the disquiet in our blood. And the second poem I've chosen to share with you is entitled Wildfire by Jalik Lopez. Breathe in my house burning, mi casa quemándose. Breathe out my birthday party, mi fiesta de cumpleaños. Breathe in my friends dying, mis amigos muriéndose. Breathe out a new house, nueva casa. Breathing in, losing electricity, perdiendo electricidad. Breathe out food, comida. Breathe in, losing your room, perdiendo mi cuarto. Breathe out a new friend, nuevo amigo. Breathing no food, no comida. Breathe out, I met my grandpa. Conocí a mi abuelo. Breathe in, losing your family, perdiendo mi familia. Breathe out, my school, mi escuela. I chose this poem because it is a poem of living on edges, the edges of culture, as well as on the edge of losing your home. I imagine that the assignment given here was to breathe in the loss and breathe out the relief of something to replace it or some further path to take. And that living on the edge is reflected culturally in the use of both English and Spanish. And the loss is of replacing it with something positive. I was very moved when in the last line, it's breathe in, losing your family. How much more on the edge can you be? And then breathing out, my school that opens possibilities. And this poem was written, the poet was in the 3rd grade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafael. I want to know where these children are now, and it's hard to get a hold of them. But I'd be interested to hear what they're thinking now that it's 2 years later and they're all a little bit older. Our next reader is Ruth Bavetta.
I'd like to read Ellen Bass's poem first. It just makes more logical sense. Those of you who know me as a poet and an artist may not realize that my first college degree was in geology. And what drew me to it was the wonder of this earth and all of things that fit together and work together so well. It was just, because geology covers more than rocks. It covers paleontology and animals and things too. And it was just wonderful. And I'm still hooked on that. And Ellen Bass's poem really speaks to that. It's called God of Roots. Meanwhile, the heat and light of a flaming star rush 93 million miles to reach us. Baby girls are born with their 400,000 egg cells already formed. Otters keep grooming their guard hair, whirling the water, working air deep into our underfur. Beluga whales swim along the Earth's magnetic field. Chicks pip a circle of holes counterclockwise around the blunt end of their eggs, pressing with their feet and heaving with their shoulders. Larvae eat their way through the soft mesophyll of oak leaves, leaving a trail of dark feces in their wake. Tart juice swells within the rinds of lemons, and under the earth, the god of roots goes on painting the lustrous fringe. With a brush so delicate, only one sable hair, as though there were all the time in the world. And my own poem shows you what's facing that. It's called Heat. And the sun said, let there be fire. And there was fire. And the fire said, let there be wind. And the wind was throbbing. And the beast of the flames pulled taut over the hills, said naught to the chaparral and nil to the coyote. And the coyote ran, and the rabbits ran, and the deer and the rattlesnake and the quail ran. And the wind sprang from its kiln and tongue-licked the eaves and the rafters and the roof. And the smoke was air, and the air was smoke. The air was our bodies. It was our shadows against the sky.
Thank you so much. I did not know you were a geologist, Ruth. I love hearing that. I have a fancy degree in folklore and mythology. Everyone laughed at for many years until I turned into a poet, and then it became quite useful. Next, we're going to hear Indigo Moore.
Thank you for inviting me here. It's been a long 2 years. I chose to write my poem. Well, I won't say I chose to write it. I was speaking to a friend who lost her house, and she spoke about a fire was alive. The party crashers of paradise. We bum rushed the stage, this gig in Butte County. 100 flaming fan dancers, open force, take the town like fire fruit dropped in hell. A blackout curtain tossed over the sun. The drummer goes hi-hat on some propane tanks, and shit got real. Crowds squeal, tone deaf. Nothing cruised like charred pines or an arpeggio of screaming hawks. A microbus humps a Mercedes behind a burning bush. It's paradise. These things happen. We advertise crippled deer chewing singed hooves, a scorched tabby in a bird bath, knotted oaks and pine cones erupting like Roman candles. Our crooner scats embers like rainbows over the middle school through the blind eye of the monkey bars. First, burrowing owls bake into tender bites, then a grandmother. Roasted manna hells down, picking the locks on a child's lungs until the wailing of fire engines finds its twins before lurching to a dead crescendo. After 7 days, we've torched everything, except the Starbucks. We own our own sacred altars, our angry gods of Wi-Fi. The fire marshal shuts us down. There's a blood cry in the curtain calls. The whole damn town was screaming something like encore. And to save my voice, I'm going to stop there. Thank you for inviting me to this.
Thank you so much, Indigo. I'm gonna jump in and read a poem for you by Twyla Hoshida, who was in the 4th grade at Cleveland Elementary School in Oakland when she wrote this. It's called Dreaming of Fire. I am the embers of a flame. From the wind, I learned to spark like a star when the breeze blows. The wind taught me to move like a flash of lightning, to move and burn the grass. When I move, I dream of fire spreading through the land. I am the storm, destroying everything, blowing over the earth like a colossal fan at top speed, twirling my fingers through the clouds, kicking off water like an angry beast. I am destruction. And here's my poem from the book, Particulate Matter. We learned all this new vocabulary as the fires got worse and worse here. And this particulate matter was one of the things that kept lodging in my brain and got me thinking about this. If all you counted were tires on the cars left in driveways and stranded beside the roads, melted dashboards and taillights, oil pans, window glass, seatbelt clasps, the propane tanks in everyone's yards, though we didn't hear them explode, R13 insulation, paint inside and out, the liquor store's plastic letters in puddled colors below their charred sign, each man-made sole of every shoe in all those closets, the laundromat's washers, round metal doors. But then Arco, Safeway, Walgreens, the library, everything they contained. How many miles of electrical wire and PVC pipe swirling into the once blue sky? How many linoleum acres? Not to mention the valley oaks, the ponderosas, all the wild hearts and all the tame, their bark and leaves and hooves and hair and bones, their final cries, and our neighbors, so many particular, precious, irreplaceable lives that despite ourselves, we're inhaling. And here is The Drought Happened by Junior Gutierrez, 5th grade, Selma Herndon Elementary School in Livingston, California. The drought happened. It stopped raining. The aquifers dried up since there was no water. There were no crops, and since no crops, no food, and no food, nothing to eat for animals and nothing to eat for humans. Everyone was starving. The drought went on for many years. Thank you for being here and for listening to us. you've heard, I'm sure, before from everywhere about how much art and writing and poetry in particular can be a tool for healing. And that's something I believe in very strongly. It certainly worked in my life and in the lives of, I would be willing to bet, 99% of my students, in all kinds of different mysterious ways. So now the four of us would love to answer any questions that anyone has and tell you everything you'd like to know.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. I'm gonna, oh, I guess that makes my writing a lot worse. I was trying to fix that there. Thank you. I'm so grateful that you were all able to join us and to read your work and also to read work from students and your fellow poets in the collection. We're just so grateful that all of you could be here with us this evening. To those of you in the audience, I welcome you to post some questions, and I'll ask as many of those as I can. Some people posted questions before the reading as well. And so one that I would just pose to all of you, and that kind of follows up on what you just said, Molly. How did working on this project, Molly, you in classrooms and with all of these poets and everyone else, writing your piece and thinking about your contribution, how did this project help you process wildfire and climate change? And I'll just open that up and welcome all of you.
Okay. I think I'm going to ask one of you guys to start because I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, jumping in there, poetry helps us process everything, helps us process every experience that it has. And when we're faced with something so devastating as a fire, and I might mention here, not just fire in our areas, but it's huge floods on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and in the Midwest, huge storms. It is the very suffering of the earth herself that calls upon us to face it in some way. And poetry is a way of facing it with an attempt to express in a beautiful form the pain that as many times leaves us speechless, cries. So words, especially when they're put into a kind of rhyme or order, that when they're dealing with images, helps us to face, to process, if you will, the traumas of burning forests, lost homes, lost lives.
Thank you.
I think that for me, I have to find a point where it has reached me, where I know someone that I'm reaching out to every day, every other day, and they're losing everything that they had. And working with artists who are trying to make changes to what's going on, and it becomes a part of the everyday of your life. And I don't know if it becomes a project as much as what you're going through. And it becomes almost like a prayer in your writing.
Thank you. Ruth, what do you think?
I'm a product of Southern California. And I have never lived out of range of the chaparral fires. It's sort of been a background of my life from when the time I was a little bitty kid out in the San Fernando Valley, followed me to San Bernardino, and now back here to San Clemente. And I've dealt with it as an artist, I've dealt with it with a whole series of paintings that explored the beauty that you can have in these flames, and yet the terror, which is also incorporated in them. And it's taking this into poetry is just one more step along that way.
Thank you. I feel like one of the things that humans have to sort of learn in our lives and go through over and over is this idea of holding paradox, of holding the beauty and the danger of fire at the same time. You can take this in any direction you want with any experience from your life where there's something to be sorry about and something to be happy for. And I think that poetry in particular is really good at containing that kind of paradox. The way that we don't have to say things all in a whole bunch of sentences that make themselves into a paragraph. We can have open spaces, we can have mysteriousness, we can leave things out. There's a way that, and poetry is so often the language of emotion. So I just feel as though it's a great vehicle for people to talk about something that's this difficult to talk about. My sister's house burned down. She lived in Merlin, Oregon, and her house burned down in a house fire. And that was my first experience. This was before the great big California wildfires had started. And just talking to her and having I had a close relationship with some of her stuff. Our parents died pretty young, and we all shared, the four of us shared items from the house, and all of her version of that had gone. And she was devastated. Of course she was devastated. And luckily nobody died. But at the same time, she still talks about 15 years later about the relief she feels learning that stuff can just go and you're okay. And I think that's some of the strains in this book. Some of the poems really kind of went to that place of both. This was awful and I'm still here. I have no idea if that answers your question, but there it is.
That was such a beautiful array of responses to that question. I just want to sit and keep listening to all of you talk about that question. I'll pose another that might get us back into that space that someone asked. How and where do you find your artistic fortitude and existential courage in overwhelmingly daunting times? I think, Indigo, you said it's been a long 2 years, and I think it has for a lot of our viewers as well. So I'll open that to all of you. How and where do you find your artistic fortitude and existential courage in overwhelmingly daunting times?
This is actually something I was speaking of with a friend the other day. In Sacramento, we don't get fires. We definitely have a fire season. Because anytime there's a fire anywhere around us, with the smoke, and we know the places are burning, even if we haven't figured out where they are in the sky, it just goes. It becomes this cloudy place where you know that the state's burning. And You stay inside because the air is horrible. And you have to find it. There's no way to avoid it. Even in your house, you smell the smoke, you feel the smoke. And if you're an artist, it just affects you. It affects everything you write.
Wow, that's a big question of where do we find our fortitude? And I think I would say where we find the fortitude is in any situation. It's in the love we have for life, the love we have for the earth, the love we have for each other. And I think there's no other route for fortitude of any kind. If, you know, the word courage is, its root is in the heart, which is the organ that we have, we associate with love. And where do we find a fortitude to carry on, and where do we find a hope? I think its very bedrock is and has to be love, love of life and love of the earth. And I'll also confess to you, it is also the root of my anger. And right now I work with a great deal of anger of the false values that have brought us to this point, and the stubbornness of holding on to those values that would devalue the earth. There's nothing more than a resource for consumable products and for profit. And I think it is that love that I spoke of that is going to force us to re-examine those false values that have the earth enthralled.
I'm not sure I can follow Raphael. Sometimes I think I don't have any courage at all. And sometimes I think I write to prop up my own fears and keep them from annihilating me. But also, if anything that can help you have courage is to communicate, is to reach out metaphorically and reach somebody else's hand. And that poetry and art is one way of doing that.
Yeah.
And I think, so this isn't just a question for artists and writers, it's a question for everybody. How do we stand it? How do we keep going? And for me, I have people that I look to, dead and living, people from history, people who are very young, who don't really have enormous personalities yet, but they have attitudes that I think, okay, I'm taking a little of that with me today. But mostly for me, I go towards beauty. If I can really help myself stave off despair if there's just anything beautiful I can find to look at. And I have practiced finding those things so that I know how to do it in times of strife. And that's maybe riding on the courage that Raphael speaks of. But it's about loving the world. It's about loving, of course, loving each other, but there's some way that loving, you know, a bent over daffodil after a snowstorm is just going to help me go a little further into the day.
Yeah, I love that because it's available to all of us all the time. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We have another question. How do you feel that poetry can contribute to a more mature relationship with fire, accepting fire as part of the ecosystem here in North America that we need to learn to live with? And I welcome any and all of you. So how do you feel that poetry can contribute to a more mature relationship with fire that accepts it as part of the ecosystem?
Go, Raphael.
Oh my God.
I thought you were making a face of about to speakness.
Well, that's the question. A more mature relationship to fire. A more mature relationship to everything.
Mhm.
Earth. You know, we use fire, well, like all like the other elements of air, fire, water, earth, are the most sacred things we have. We have not held the four elements sacred. We have blasphemed against them. And that is the very thing that has brought us to this brink of extinction. And we have to face that very, very squarely. We have to re-sacralize our relationship to the four sacred elements. Just consider, we have made them all commodities. Consider how we have used the gift of fire by flinging it at each other's heads. Right now, when the biggest threat is nuclear annihilation, nuclear warfare. To see that this cleverness of humankind was able to harness the energy of the atom to reproduce explosions like those that take place on the face of the sun. And how do we first use it to kill each other? And now we use it to threaten each other for the silliest of reasons, to take possession of the elements of the earth against each other, not to share them, but in the confrontations. Who controls the sphere of influence where? Just look at how we spend our energies, our wealth. We hesitate because it costs too much to take care of each other with universal health care, but we do not bat an eye to finance more nuclear weapons and more military. If that is not stupidity and immaturity, I do not know what is. And we have to face very, very squarely where we are. What is the maturity that we can garner to not confront fire, but to hold it sacred? And as I said, there's anger in my voice. And part of that is the desperation, the fear, because everything I love is threatened at this point. Everything I love is threatened. And I get impatient.
Mhm.
Photographer and artist Michael Llewellyn has a wonderful exhibit in Truckee. And he's exploring these ideas of what we can do and how we can become one with this season. Because it is a season now where every year the smoke comes and places burn. And I've read and been pointed to often enough about how we've helped to change things in the forest and how things have changed over the years. And I think they're right, it's not going to go away anytime soon. I do believe that we as artists, by doing things like this wonderful anthology, are making it so that we are aware of what's going on. And if there's someone who can find ways to change it or for it to become more for us, it's not going to be me. I'm not intelligent enough. Hopefully they'll be inspired by what's going on. So again, Molly, what you're doing is wonderful.
Thank you.
I think poetry can do what academic lectures and scientific papers and newspaper articles can't. They speak to our brain. Poetry speaks to the heart, and that reaches people. When Molly reads that Particulate Matter poem, no matter how many times I've heard it or read it, it just gets me. And it gets me in a way that an article in the New Yorker does not.
Thank you. I think, so we've heard, I'm sure we've all heard the idea of Native peoples lighting fires on purpose to control how big the undergrowth will get. There's a way that using fire itself to manage itself. When there's a big fire going on, often the firefighters will start a smaller fire in certain places to backburn and protect a spot so that the main fire won't jump over it. I think there's some way that, because we're dealing with paradox, I'm just going to talk about paradox all night. There's a way that we can open up the thinking, partly by working on people's hearts as well as on their intellect, to say, think wider, think more openly, think about the thing that's bad turning into something that would be good. Look at the fact that something isn't, don't be a fundamentalist about things. I mean, fire is horrible and terrible, and it does all these drastic things, and it's beautiful. So artistically, there's that. And then it's useful in fighting itself. I mean, I love this idea of looking into the thing you're trying to control and having it help you control it. And I think that because so many of us are working in whatever artistic way that we have to talk about what's true, that there's a way to take all those different truths and build something that would be a more mature relationship with wildfire.
Oh, I appreciate all of your answers so much, and I want to just thank all of you. We have so quickly come to the end of our time this evening. I can't believe that it's already 7 o'clock. I wanted to give you my deep thanks. Thanks also to everyone in the audience, and I think Molly, what you were just saying. This lecture series has explored that paradox in so many different ways over the weeks, and so I invite folks who are tuning in tonight, if you haven't seen all of the lectures, or if you want to revisit some of them and think about this more now and over the years to come. Almost everything is available online on the Spring Creek Project's YouTube channel, and you are free to share it widely and openly in any way that you'd like to. And I also invite you, if you don't already have a copy, if you'd like to read some of the pieces that you heard tonight, and also read an incredible collection here from, like we said, over 100 poets that many of you know, and also these incredible young voices that Molly worked with to create the anthology. I encourage you to get a copy if you don't already have one for your library and friends. And for the poets and photographers and writers and artists who are watching tonight and have networks, we invite everybody to consider submitting a piece to the series that we'll be running with terrain.org, writing and art about wildfire. So we've got that link in chat. And so I'll end tonight again with some gratitude to all of you. And, you know, Molly, we were talking about that it's rare to get through a Zoom session without a cat. And so I also want to welcome and say goodnight to your cat this evening. I think that's our...
We should be done. She thinks the hour is over.
It's probably her dinner time. So thank you so much to everyone and good night.
You're welcome. Much love to all of you.